All right. We will get started for tonight with sort of a joint mentioning. We are paying attention to the feedback that is being logged on the forums, as well as questions that are being asked on Slack. Not really a problem, but the biggest pieces we're trying to figure out still currently are around timing, how to do each class. To be transparent, one reason we don't really want to switch the start times is we don't want to cause people to be confused which night they start at 6 and which night they start at 7:30. So one of the reasons we sort of chose a specific start time for each one. People don't have to remember, oh, on Mondays I start at this time, Thursdays I start at this time, or was it switched for this week? That's a reason the start times between the classes are sort of set how they are, as well as some desires from those, what's the word I'm looking for, presenting the content. As for sound, there's been some issues with people in the back, sort of in both sections, either the JavaScript or the C#, whenever you're attempting to do work. I think I fixed it so that if you go in any of these rooms or go to the other side or go somewhere in this space that you can close the door and work, you shouldn't hear more than a muffled sound through a wall. I didn't understand how this worked over here. There's 4 bonus things you can turn on that allow you to hear whoever is presenting somewhere else in the building, but you can't see them. But it sounds like they're right next to you, and they're not. So turn those off. If you hear it and it sounds like we're standing next to you, but you're not in this main area, let me know, and I'll ask Tina how to fix that. I think turning those off will have fixed it, other than speaking here. And there's no way, I wanted to turn off the back set of speakers so that people in the back don't have to hear if they don't want to, but that's not an option. System setup, so unfortunately that won't be happening. Do continue to give feedback though. There are some ideas around how we could structure it that may work out a little better than what we're doing right now. But our goal is to make the class better for everyone. So that's our hope. Continue to give us feedback. It does help. That's actually why I knew to turn those things off. It's because someone let us know that it sounded like one of us was standing next to them and we were not. And a note about the space, the fans. So it might be warmer than we want it to be. I tried to turn them on and the light switch thing broke out and wouldn't turn them on. So I don't know how to turn them on when it doesn't work. And that is it for the joint announcements. Group, feel free to ignore me now, unless you really want to learn about C#. As for the C# group, before we start with the starter questions, remember that you have an assignment due Thursday, and if you've already done it, some people, a few. So feel free to demo it once you have it. That's it for now before we do starter questions. Your group, do some of the starter questions, and then we'll come back and go over the studio and then the rest of the lecture.
All right, so for this week, we're getting into a little bit how web apps are structured in C#. So covered MVC, routing, some things like that. So the questions are all around those concepts. So the first question is, well, actually, the first question or more of the question would be, what is MVC? What does it stand for? Model view controller, right? And so subsequent to that, what are each of those pieces? What is a month?
myself. If you have any questions as I'm going through stuff or want things answered that I'm not answering yet, feel free to post them in the LOKC channel and mention me so I get that little ding sound and know to go and look at it. The main reason is because it then goes to my watch and I can attempt to read it. That's why I sometimes do this. I become distracted. If you don't post it in the same message, I don't get to see it. So the format of what I'm going to cover this evening, I'll go over the studio and a solution for it. After that, I will cover some of the particular questions people have from sort of the initial start. And then I will go over an example MVC web app. Sort of talk through the different pieces there and the different files. I'm going to go a little bit more into detail on how some of those files work and interact so that there's less magic in how it all comes together and you somehow just click the play button and boom, you have a website running. So I'm going to point out some of the pieces and how it's not as magical as it may seem, and it's actually, in the way that it goes and runs, is very similar to Google App Engine and Web App 2, which we were using in Python. The main difference is it's compiled. I'll answer this one right off the bat. So there's a question, this is sort of in general for all of your C# code. Is there a way to do what's called hot reloading, which is a common thing you see in various other languages? So the goal is the ability to not have to be like, stop, start, have it recompile. To my knowledge, for C# there is not one. And that is because it has to recompile and link the code. So in the whole process of what it does, it is really 5 to 10 seconds each time. At least that's how long it takes on my computer. Each time I make a change and I don't see it, which can be a little aggravating, but the big benefit you get, and I'll talk through it later, with all that time that it takes to compile and run code, is you get to avoid a lot of the headache you can have with non-type languages that do not compile around, oh, I just changed one line. My code still runs, but then when I go and hit this one specific path, it's actually like functionally not allowed. Like you go and return a string, you should return an integer, or vice versa. So while you do pay for that with some slowness to development, once you do have an application running that's large enough, you have a lot of benefits you gain from having that statically typed language. Downside, I'm unaware of a plugin that will do what's referred to as hot reloading. Does it for templates, but it does not do it for the actual C# code in your controllers, your models, those other files. Without further ado, we will cover a solution for this studio, the counting character studio. Purpose of the studio count characters in a sort of random string manner. So if you were given a random string, oh, that's a different one. So if you're given random string of some kind or a large string, you would choose an appropriate data structure to count and print out all of those strings. So the first thing we'll want to do before we go and write any code is think about, as it mentioned, we have 3 data structures that we can choose here. One reason I would not advocate for an array is we do not necessarily know all of the letters we will have up front. So depending on how we write the program, we may want to show all 26 standard Latin characters, A through Z, although that's still not all standard because there are a bunch of accents you can throw on there. Even the Latin character set. But we're not really going to know how many letters we have. So an array wouldn't be a great choice because we'd have to be resizing or making a new array for every character that we have. So we can sort of throw array out as an option. So then from there, it's sort of a choice between dictionary and list. The advantage you would have with list, same with dictionary, you can keep adding to it over and over. One of the downsides to list, in this case, is that each time you need to go add another count to one of your letters, you'd have to go through your whole list in order to know which letter to go and add a count to. So as we're going, say we go over this text, we would go and put an L on our list, we would make a list of lists. So that already sounds pretty complicated, so then we'll probably think about using a dictionary, much like we did in Python, for a very similar assignment. The dictionary sort of, at least to me, makes sense because each key can be a letter, and then you have instant access, and you can immediately go and set those values and increment them the whole time. So I would choose dictionary to begin with. And then sort of the output, we want something, we sort of put them out. And we'll do some of these bonus mission items. Specifically, we will do the top two, not the bottom two, mainly for the sake of time. So we know that we need a place to actually do the work. So we'll make a directory. We'll call this counting characters. We go into that counting characters directory, run our .NET new command, which goes and creates a new C# project. So we have our C# project here. And click our little restore button. And this will become happier in a moment. Yes. It's just a wee bit slower in its initial realizing of the project than if you're using Visual Studio 2015 locally. So first things first, we know this is the string we want to count. So we'll go and make this a string. We'll count it. And this is that string literal syntax. Because I have problems with strings that go off of the screen. There we go. That should be, is that easier to read now? So we have our words to count. It's underlined in green because those aren't words that are recognized as spelled correctly. All right. So we have our words. Next step, we'll want a dictionary for our word count. All right. Character counts. And we need to actually create it. That's right. See if I had a fancier IDE. Then it would have realized that's what I needed, and it would have auto added it up at the top. And this is a downside of not using the fancy IDE. So now we have our dictionary. We're going to hold our character counts in there. So the first thing, in order to fulfill bonus criteria number 1, is in order to make the counts insensitive, we can just go ahead and make the string lowercase. I'll do a words to count dot, I think it's 2 lower. Yes. Almost very similar to Python and also very similar to JavaScript. In most languages, your strings have a method on them that gives you some kind of way to make them lowercase. You can usually assume it has the word lower in it. Now that we've made our lowercase words and we have our dictionary, we can go ahead here and start counting the words. And initially, we'll just count them sort of as we go over them. So make our for each character. I think char is the type. Yes. Good indicator that should be a character type. So for each one of the characters in our words to count, we'll want to go and count those characters. The advantage we have now is I'm going over the wrong one. I want to go over the lowercase ones. So lower words to count. Well, that's sort of a misnomer. Want a better name. Because we're counting characters, not words. So make that more clear. So now for each one of those characters, we want to count it if it's not outside of our range. We won't do that initially, and by range, it's one of the A to Z characters. So initially what we'll do is just add them there if they're not. So what we can do is character counts. Ouch. There we go. Contains key. Right here, this contains key returns true if the dictionary contains an element that was specified, otherwise it returns false. I couldn't actually remember what it was, but that is one of the advantages to the autocomplete. It's like sort of read through and remember that way. So if it has the key, what we'll want to do is character counts at our character plus equals 1. And when we initialize it, character counts dot add well, as long as I haven't messed this up, which is entirely possible, we should, in this section, begin counting the characters. Then at the end, the output it desires is each one of these.
Wouldn't you add character 1 rather than character 0 because it's the first instance of the character?
That's a great choice. Yes. Those are the great off by 1 errors that happen in software development. Yes, we do in fact want it to be 1. Now there is another way to write it such that you could say if it's not there, then add it at 0 and then +1, but that would be confusing. So we have our characters, and then now we can start printing them out. And sort of just to make sure that the code runs. We're not printing anything yet. We can tell it to run. So compilation succeeded and it printed. We don't actually know it's counting them correctly, but we at least know the code compiles and we've written a program that's syntactically correct. That's always something I prefer to do as I go along writing the C# code to make sure I'm not sort of miserably failing and not knowing it. So for each, I had a note to cover this specifically. Key value pair. So key value pair is a built-in type in C#. Character and int. We will call this character count. Our character counts. And we'll go and do something in here. Your C# code is actually probably putting all these, at least it did when I was doing it on my Windows machine, these curly braces on the next line for you when you hit enter, and that's totally fine. You should actually format it likely that way. Sort of seems to be the default. So what I want to do here is write out. We use write line, so we get that new line character. We want to write out that string. So we'll want a new string message. So we wanted the key, is it colon space? Yeah. And the value. So we can do character count dot key and character count dot value. And one of the things that's kind of nice about the auto completion and such that you get is it usually has a symbol difference between what are attributes that you can just call and get the value of, and what are methods that will then need parameters passed to it in order to get a value returned. So in this case, we know we want the value. And we want to print out the message. We'll write line the message. And we'll see if this works as desired. And it does appear to. The order is seemingly random. So we got 18 L's, and this got 18 L's between the lowercase and the uppercase. So we should safely, I think we're getting the values correct, but we'll add to it now is to make sure it only counts sort of what we deem standard characters. We can do that by comparing characters in a similar way that we did in Python. So we can do a comparison of if character is greater than or equal to lowercase a and character is less than or equal to z. If we run it, that does appear to have worked correctly. I don't actually think there are any z's in it. There are not. So there are no z's in it, which is why it doesn't show the z there. Oh, if you have concerns about the storm, feel free to head home whenever. You are not required to. So now we're adding the sort of proper characters here. The next bit, well, that is all of them. In order to sort of cover the MVC, is there any questions around this studio? I was gonna do sorting, but I want to make sure.
Why are you using the first if statement for
This if statement? The reason this first if statement is here is we have no reason to modify the dictionary if we do not have a character that is between A and Z. So the purpose, the bonus down here, is to exclude non-alphabetic characters. So that's why we have that first if statement. Just don't do anything in the event that that's there. I would write this differently. We haven't worked on something that's called a continue statement, but you can make this code a little easier to read by using what's called a guard clause, which would be instead of nesting this code in here, we use a very similar if statement to say if the character is outside of one of these letters, then just keep going around. That's called a continue. So you would invert it to say something like, if it's less than A or greater than Z, continue. That'll execute the same. A lot of people like guard clauses because when you go into a block of code, you can easily tell right at the start if it's going to keep going. Whereas when you have nested conditionals, it makes it a lot harder to read because then you have to go, oh, if that character's in that range, then let me go and see what happens next. With the guard clause, you can know immediately. Normally you'd have a little comment there. You'd go, oh, if I have a character that's outside of the range A to Z, continue. And what continue does is it goes through the next iteration of the loop that you're inside. Python has that, as does JavaScript. Sort of make that easier. But that's a bonus. So the committed solution that you'll see later will be this one. Are there any questions on this before we move forward into model view controller stuff? As a note for the evening, after we're done up here, my sole purpose is going to be traveling around to make sure everyone has all their stuff installed and is able to get working on assignments as well as studios and the exercise problems. All right, no questions. I will assume then this was the clearest thing to read in the world. And we'll start on our example web application. Before we go on to that, this is why I have notes down here, so I remember to do it. There's a question around string builder, and if we'll cover using it. I'm explicitly not covering using it in any examples, because sort of the only thing that string builder gives you that you don't get when using just strings and creating a new one is it doesn't allocate more memory to go and update the string. So the strings normally in C# and in a lot of programming languages are immutable, which means you're not allowed to change them once they're created.
Oh, you did? Okay.
So for example, here, our characters to count, this big long string, we can't change that after we've declared it. That's why down below we call toLower, and that method goes and returns a new string, which is why we had to go and create a whole new string. So we can see the method signature here, and you can set it returns a copy of the string converted to lowercase. See the type is string, and then it's found on string.toLower. Type that it returns a string. And it's public because we can call it. So if other curiosities between the public and private and what that means, we'll cover that in a little more detail later on. But as for the string builder class, the only reason to really use it is if you're doing a lot of string manipulation. So say you were going to build a giant CSV, count of separated values, something that you might export from your program for someone to go and use in Excel. That would probably be a good candidate if you're not using a CSV library to build your CSV, to then use a string builder to go and build up all the data for your file so that you're not constantly allocating new memory for each row of your file. So a lot of the times if you were going to be creating a file, that's where the string builder class would come in handy, because it's okay to modify that string. That's what the string builder class lets you do. The next piece is related to MVC. Something that was desired to be covered was the idea of the filters. The filters are not really what you, at least to me, I think of when someone says filter in the context that we are using them. They are much more similar if you use them at all in Python, and they're actually also in the vernacular of .NET MVC, as I found out in sort of working on this, also referred to as decorators. And those filters, I think I have an example. Oh, I don't have an example here. Here we go. You can ignore the bulk of this entire file. The filters are in reference to these little, what appear to be arrays that you go and create at the top, just above a method on one of your controllers. The goal of those filters is so that you can easily apply some other functionality to your controller action. I'll go into more details about each one of these. But specifically with the filters, they're what allow you to say, all right, this responds to a GET request. There are better ones that allow more. And later on, we'll get to the subject of authorization, much like we did with user login for FlickList.
There are built-in ones that allow, so log in, you want anyone to be able to log into your site. There are automatic ones that say allow anonymous. So anyone could go to a page to be able to log in. So these filters are also known as decorators. So if you're trying to sort of look out and sort of Google around, people have also referred to them as decorators, because they go just above your method and they apply extra functionality. That's what the filters end up doing. And a brief statement for the MVC stuff. We have a lot that we sort of just, the curriculum is thrown at you at once, especially for the learning C# as well as a much larger and robust concept of MVC and it being applied. We had a little bit of that with Web App 2, but due sort of to the nature of Python as well as specifically that Web App 2 framework, the separation of concerns were not nearly as opinionated and requiring as what you see here. I mean, you specifically have the model, view, and controllers, as you can sort of see in the side panel there. And that's how it is split up in MVC. So we're going to be covering a lot of these concepts and how they're split apart in C#. Overall, the concept of model view controller, the idea that you have sort of a central brain, the controller, that decides where to grab data out of, which is normally your models, and then where to tell that data then to be displayed, which is normally done in your views. That concept exists in pretty much every modern web framework that you will use, especially if it's on the back end. You may hear other fancy acronyms like MVVC. They all effectively do the same thing. You take data from one spot using something that is a brain, so in most cases a controller. It uses its brain to then figure out where to grab that data from. So it then knows, okay, I have these different models I can get data out of. Then it says, all right, I'll pass that off to a view. The view will then go and render it. And you can largely ignore. So I'll commit this code so that you can see. This is the default layout if you just build a web project. It's the same in this editor as well as the Visual Studio 2015. If you choose the I want a new web template, I believe is what they refer to it as, gives you some built-in user authorization and user registration out of the box, which is nice, but you can ignore all that for this evening. The only files we'll really be covering is the home controller. For tonight, we'll only cover the home controller, and then I want to mention some of these files down below and how the app actually sort of starts and gets running. Yeah. So this first file that I want to go over is the program.cs, which is the same as all the console programs that we've been writing. Works out the same. Main difference is it uses a few different imports than what we've been using. You really need to know all of these details of what methods are getting called. But the main thing to know is that there's a main here that gets executed, and then what it ends up doing at the end is host.run. And host.run runs a web application and blocks the calling thread until the host is shut down. What that means is what you see every time we run one, if you've been running the MVC application locally. So if I go here, go into my example web app,
I was running at localhost 5000. It did it on my lower screen and not here. You go, and I actually overrode that default giant banner DLE that has all the documentation, whatnot. I removed that. But as you can see, all that call to host does is it does run, and it just sits here until it's closed and tells it to stop running. And these other methods that get called are what go and set it up, and it sort of figures out which files to use. And the other key ingredient in the program starting up and running is the startup.cs file. And the main sort of pieces that this gives you is that, so we can sort of just see here, we can ignore a lot of the code and just see that it goes, oh, I go to this app settings.json file, and it goes and reads in configuration, what's called configuration from there. Goes and builds some other stuff. And this file is what's going and setting up kind of all that magic that hooks the controller names to the view names and all of that, and just sort of kind of works. This file is what's going and actually explicitly calling all of these methods and setting it all up for you. When you generate the project skeleton, you get all of this auto-generated code for you that is then going and actually doing the heavy lifting of connecting all the components together to make it fairly easy to go and create a web application. Something we didn't get out of the box with Web App 2. Web App 2, we had to go define everything ourselves, go and hook up all of our routes to our controllers, which we called handlers there. Whereas now in here, this generated the code that then allows us to easily set everything up by its name. You don't really need to worry about many of the contents of this file. The interesting part is this app settings.json and the way that it actually goes and pulls that in automatically. So on Thursday, I'll actually show you some changes I had to make. Not to those files, but once we start covering templates, because of the way that goes and does default setup, which is the whole reason I looked in those files at all, otherwise I've ignored their existence, causing some problems locally when I ran my code in different ways. Those problems being that none of the, like you get this pretty page, well, pretty might be objective, but you get a page that looks all right. Whenever I went and ran it the first time, didn't look all right. It didn't load any of the CSS. So all I had was just a bunch of text and gobbledygook on there. And I'll share that on Thursday, but that's what led me to want to show this program and startup file. If you're curious at all to how everything's getting pulled together, it's between that program and startup file. Those aren't as important to know right now, but I wanted to show you at least so that you can understand and see a little bit more of under the hood of how everything's coming together and it's just kind of working for you. So the bit to cover will be this home controller. And before we even cover anything that's in here, we notice that it's in the controllers folder and it's called home controller. So we automatically get a route at /home that shows this page. By default, .NET will display at the /URL what is in your home controller. It goes to your home controller by default. But you can also explicitly click or go directly to the URL. And that's what got set up for you sort of automatically by that startup file. It set up the router and the controller for you so that all you have to do is name your controller and then it pulls it on that page. Now I'll start going over some of these, what are called actions, which are just methods of your controller. If you are attempting to kind of just pull in the code that I have directly, it may not work the way you want it to, not because it won't work on your computer. What I've noticed when I try to go and clone or pull in someone else's repositories that have multiple different applications inside of them is that I needed to go on the right side of Visual Studio with the solution pane, and then I had to right click on it and either tell it to build it or go to the file, new, open existing, start from existing project, and then pull in the directory specifically that I was trying to use. That's how I've been able to pull in existing code. And I can show you after this. I don't have my Windows computer here in the room to show that, which would be helpful. So back to the home controller. We notice the first method here that exists is index. And we can see that there is a call to a method that I'll show you in a second. It's just called page base. I didn't give it a description, so all you get to see is that it returns a string. That string is just sort of the default junk. It's at the bottom of this file. It's a method down here. It's got all the stuff pointing there. The main thing is that right here, I have the little 0 curly braces dealy so that I could have a page that had links on it and could easily throw in each bit of content for each one of these. So the index is the default that shows up when you go to a controller. So home is the controller. It is the default. You can also see it when you go to /index. Pulls up the same thing. The same content, because it's going automatically routed to this first controller action, index. And what I'm doing here is I'm doing a return content, not the call to view that you see by default. I left it there commented out so you could see what would normally happen. For tonight, we are purposely rendering our strings directly. So what I do is I format that response, and I pass in the specific page's content. In this case, that the home page doesn't have much on it. And then the other piece here is I'm explicitly telling it that it is text HTML. If I don't tell it that it's text HTML, as demonstrated in the initial reading / watching, I suppose. Come here and refresh, and it just looks like HTML. No formatting, no anything, and that's because if we go down here and look at the network request, I'll zoom this in. The response header says text plain, which is why we have to make it text HTML. Oh, that doesn't work correctly. If I do .NET run again, forces it to then recompile and restart. If I do a refresh, now it says text HTML. And because it interpreted that document as HTML, it went and grabbed all those other resources declared in the head, the Bootstrap files, the JavaScript files. And this is what's referred to as your MIME type. Or content type. That content type is what the browser reads to know how to interpret your file. We've covered that. And each one of these requests is a GET request. And the router is automatically sending it on your behalf to the correct controller action. So the controller is called home, so /home, that's why that exists there. And then we have index, which is the default, sort of shows that by default. Next, we have the about. Same setup, different message. So if you look at the URL, /home/about, and then it goes and displays the message for your about page. Each one of these methods is what's called an action. And that's sort of standard, even in other frameworks, for it to sort of build out your URL in that pattern, where the first part of your path is your controller, and the next part of your path is the action on that controller, which from a programming standpoint is the method. But the vernacular often used is action to describe that. And in this case, they all return something called an action result. And contact and index all have the same sort of formula for how they're showing their content, which is they call page base, which is that method that goes returns that giant string, goes and formats it, and then we render that to the page. So contact, as you might expect, I can go and change this to contact, goes and renders page for contacting. You can see it here in the message that we put in. And these links, so /home/contact, leads to the home controller and the contact method. And then this last bit at the end is that page base. So
what's the @ symbol doing from the string?
So the question is, what does this @ symbol do again? The @ symbol declares what is called a string literal, which means you do not have to escape any of the values in the string coming after it in order to make it work. The other advantage it has is you don't have to do concatenation necessarily. So it has all those new lines in there. So there's a new line after each one of these. And Python has a similar syntax. If you're wondering how to do this in Python, you use triple double quotes or triple single quotes and wrap the string in the same sort of way. And you get what is often referred to as a multi-line string. So this is a way in C# to achieve a multi-line string. Is what you might Google there if you were wanting to know. That's what I Googled in order to figure it out. It's multi-line string. What I discovered in finding that is that it's more specific than just a multi-line string. It is a string literal, and that matters because you have to do work to make it show certain characters then. Like if you, normally you might do like /n if you wanted a new line, but you actually have to explicitly put the new line character in there, which you can't see other than there's text on the next line. So the @ symbol declares a string literal. I've used it a fair amount, mostly because I don't like concatenating strings over and over. I think it's easy. It's easier for me to read because I can read it like uncolored HTML, no syntax highlighting, but I can sort of read this. So in our head here, so we declared the doc type, Start the HTML, our head, character set. I had mentioned there are a number of meta tags you can use in HTML that help the browser determine what to do. By saying it's UTF-8, tells the browser which characters specifically to consider whenever it's reading the document. So it can make some performance benefits there. You can mostly ignore this viewport one. Whole reason that's there is a combination of we're using Twitter Bootstrap. It's the default framework that you kind of get to use. What that viewport sets up makes it easier for your browser to be what's called responsive. If you've heard about responsive design, responsive web browsers, works on mobile. Mainly what that viewport declaration does, I can't see the other side of the screen, so that's not gonna work. But if I made this smaller, it would respond, actually. I can cheat it and do this little phone button. We'll pretend we have an iPhone 6. And I can't zoom in anymore. But what you may or may not notice is it made a really tiny hamburger icon. I didn't know it was going to be that terrible. Oh, wait, I can zoom in. There we go. So that viewport is what helps set up this, like it got smaller. I don't want to hear my voice. It's terrible. So a viewport is what set up the ability for when we make it smaller. It just automatically sort of conforms and looks sort of how you would expect it on a phone. One of the advantage to the developer tools in Chrome, I think Firefox may have it as well. You can click this little button here that looks like a phone and a tablet, and you can sort of toggle between each one. So in this case, this is what it normally looks like. That's what the viewport's doing. Set the title. Title is what is the little words at the top in your tab. And then the next two things are these style sheets that we've set up, make the page look a little nicer. Specifically, we go and pull from this seemingly random URL that goes and pulls in those styles for Twitter Bootstrap. Twitter Bootstrap is a CSS and JavaScript framework that makes it a lot easier to sort of build components and web pages so you don't have to think about all the design components necessarily up front. You kind of, you need a form, you need different pieces. That's what Twitter Bootstrap gives you. So URL is getbootstrap.com/CSS. You don't have to go there, just go to the Bootstrap directly. You can tell I've gone there a lot because it already went to that page automatically in my history. But it has a bunch of built-in components. So it'll have nice headers for you, styled buttons. So you can have different colored buttons. Makes sort of nice image helpers. So if you've noticed on a number of websites, they have like little circle images, people's faces in the middle, rounded squares and such. A lot of those come from using frameworks like Twitter Bootstrap. And then I'll mention these little helper classes, give you different colored text. Then it has these other things referred to as components. So then you have a bunch of icons that you can use. But you're free to browse all the documentation here as you sort of build your websites. But Twitter Bootstrap is a pretty awesome tool that came out 6 or 7 years ago, maybe more than that. That makes it pretty easy to just sort of throw a web page together that looks decent without having to do a lot of work. So things like a navigation bar can be tricky to sort of build out, like drop down that sort of comes over content like it should. You have different areas. All this is built in. You just have to use different HTML and sort of links it all together for you. The biggest advantage to using Bootstrap is you don't have to write very much, if any, JavaScript in order to get some pretty cool interactions on the screen. But that's all I'll cover of Bootstrap for now.
The sort of terribly ugly markup, which is actually a side effect of using Twitter Bootstrap. All these icons, all this is markup you can just copy out of Bootstrap and paste in. This is what was auto-generated by running that .NET new -t web if you're using the command line client. If you're using Visual Studio, it's that new, and then you choose web application. So this div here is what goes and sets up the little navigation at the top. This container body content is what goes and fills it out. And then we have this little footer. And there's a little copyright symbol, 2016. Web application. I can assure you there's not really a real copyright on this. It's not legitimate. And then some more script loading at the bottom. This is what loads the JavaScript. We haven't really covered it. But in general, whenever you load JavaScript on your web pages, you want that to be at the bottom of your body tag. And the reason for that is your browser will do what's called blocking. So it will block displaying anything on the page until it has loaded every resource, so JavaScript file, CSS file. You've told it to load before it gets to any one of these tags. So it loads everything in your head. So HTML reads it in from top to bottom. So it loads everything in head. So we'll go and load these CSS files before it goes and shows anything to your user. So the downside of loading very large files, be them images or JavaScript files, before you've started to show content, so in this case, these really awesome messages. Downside to including a bunch of JavaScript or big images before you get to your actual text content, which is usually what you care about, is that's why on a number of sites they seem really slow to load. Like a lot of news sites sometimes seem slow to load, and that's because they're having JavaScript or big images load before their content. That can lead to sort of it being difficult to tell what's going on. Any questions before we start on the studio, or questions I've missed? All right, we will go on. What? Ugh. We will go to our bonjour ASP.NET. So this is a Hello World program, but it's Hello World in 5 languages. It's exciting. You're pretty excited? I can tell. And if you don't know 5 languages, there's this awesome website called Google where you can type translate and then you can say hello and then just click lots of other languages. Is Gaelic on here? I don't know if that is Gaelic or not, but you can choose. Yes, Scottish Gaelic. See? But you didn't know that the Scottish actually have a different language than the Irish, and they're 2 different forms of Gaelic. That's also exciting, unrelated to programming. I thought that was interesting. You may not. But they're so close together. So if you're having trouble figuring out different languages, you go here. If you wanted to go the extra mile, you could go and just make it dynamically get it, but don't do that. It's a lot of work. It's not worth the time, unless you just really want to. So goal of this program, create a form
that submits and lets you choose different languages. What you're doing in this studio is very similar to what you'll be doing in your assignment, as well as what is covered in the preparation work, course materials. Should be a to remember those words. Are there any questions on the studio? For you're all free to stand up and rotate. Not yet. Gotta make sure no one has any questions first. I know everyone loves the shuffle times. I would say don't really worry about the static property one because that's not covered until the prep work for Thursday. It's actually a number of things in this bonus missions area that's not covered until then. But I'll go over the answer to this on Thursday as well. You will likely use as a hint the post filter as seen in this example, not that one. So right here, you can do a post. This handles the post. Ignore that. But this little HTTP host, you get that out of using, what are these called? You get that out of one of the default packages up here. I believe it's the MVC one, but I'm probably wrong.
Did you use Yeoman to generate that?
Question was, did I use Yeoman to generate this? And no, I ignored all of the Yeoman business for the Mac, if anyone's using Macs. And all I did was use the .NET. I'll just demonstrate it. So made a directory. And then within that directory, there's .NET new -t web. That -t is a command you can pass, changes the type of what it goes and creates, the type of project. And in this case, that then goes and creates another giant application project. And for free, you get all that other bonus stuff. But that's the command I ran to generate the example one. Then I went and modified that controller. Yes.
Those missions says to try to put the languages in a model. We try to figure out how to use models on our own.
So the question is, the bonus here mentions using models to go and store that information and retrieve it for the languages. I discourage you from if you want to teach the models to yourself, just in this, you can, but there's a dedicated class, I believe, next Monday for models, or maybe next Thursday. One of those 2 days. So do not feel like you need to do all of the bonus mission here. The main reason for the bonus missions are if you're able to get through this work in a very short amount of time, sort of give you a little bit extra work or features that you can add. That's what the bonus mission is for. Bonus mission is entirely optional, but if you want an extra challenge or a way to learn some more material, that's what the bonus mission is for. I believe these bonus missions are a bit ambitious for the content we've covered so far. Some of them aren't, but I think the bulk of them are ambitious.
One of the non-bonus missions actually talks about creating models. Unless I'm misunderstanding. Include a new public stack in an elemental model class.
Yes. You're free to ignore that model class right now, and you can just jam that on your controller. Feel free to do that for this assignment because we've only covered controllers. That is an oversight I will let Chris know about. Any other questions? Big note for everyone, if you didn't just get it, the model is not needed. Just jam that data into your controller. Slide it in there. All right, stand and swap. And remember, if the weather is more than what you want, feel free to travel home. You're not burdened to be here. I don't want anyone to stay here that feels unsafe traveling home later.
So, how do you